Good evening, everyone, and welcome to WANA Live, the reading series of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. I'm Damian Dresick, and I'm here with my co-host, Christina Fasonic.
Yes, and we are in Brookville, Pennsylvania at Watershed Books. And we have someone from Watershed here to tell you about where we are and what we're doing and all the cool stuff that happens here.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Jo Shire, and I'm the president of the board that governs the activities of the Watershed Journal Literary Group. And we are so delighted to be hosting our good friends, the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia, here at Watershed Books. Where are we? We're at 108 Main Street in Brookville, Pennsylvania. And we're so proud of this bookstore because of a few things. First of all, it is a not-for-profit run entirely by volunteers, some of whom are right behind us here. And all of our books are used and they're donated by our generous community. The proceeds from the bookstore go to support the quarterly journal that we publish with photographs, art, and writing that represents the storytellers of our region. The proceeds also support the Literary Arts Center, where we're sitting right here. And this is where writers come together to become inspired, to collaborate, to encourage one another, and to hone their skills through workshops that a few people sitting right here have been involved in the past. And then we have the largest collection of regional authors' books that are available here, not only in the store, but also on our virtual bookstore at bookshop.org. So we're delighted to host this version of WANA's live series, and I'll turn it back over to you folks for our guest.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Jo.
you
We're
very
so
much.
glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for inviting
Speaking
us.
of guests.
So I know that this is an unusual and an historic moment for WANA Live because we are actually live with a writer. Sometimes Damian and I are live together, but we've never been live with our writer before. And we hope that this means that the end of the pandemic is nigh. That is what we're hoping for. So tonight, allow me to introduce our writer. It's going to be weird because he's sitting right here. So if I point to him frequently, I feel like I have to. So David Drayer is the author of the novel Strip Cuts, A Noble Story, Something Fierce, the novella Attachment, and the autobiographical collection Wayward Son, Travels and Reflections. Born in the small town of Rimersburg, Pennsylvania, Drayer has lived in Los Angeles, New York, and many cities in between. He holds an MFA from the University of Iowa and has worked countless jobs, including stints as an adjunct English professor, the hardest job of all, ghostwriter, actor, corporate trainer, and instructional designer. His novella Attachment is currently in development with Winterlight Pictures and Voyage Media and in Los Angeles. David has a penchant for open-ended motorcycle trips, long hikes, and good food. More biographical information can be found about him at David Drayer.
It's a new story I just wrote. And it's for my first book, Strip Cuts, which has been 21 years since that first book, believe it or not. And a lot of people have asked me over the years, so what happens with Seth? Does he ever leave the town or whatever? And so this is the first 8 minutes of that story. It's a big story, but this is just the first 8 minutes of it. So this is what happens with Seth, and that's that. All right.
All right.
We're going
to slide to the side and let you go.
Okay. All right. This is called Just Going. I sure hope I'm not just another dumbass. I remember saying that aloud, and in all sincerity, on the cold January day I left home in 1988. I was 21 years old and giving voice to the fear that caught up with me when my car broke down. I'd been driving for 8 solid hours and was lost somewhere in Kentucky, which meant I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere in Indiana, and then made matters worse by trying to get back on track with a shortcut. This predicament shouldn't have been a surprise. I was driving across the country in an old Plymouth I'd picked up for $250. This was my first trip outside of Pennsylvania. I'd never lived anywhere other than the one red light town of Cherry Run. Of course the car was going to break down. Of course I was going to get lost. I often shake my head at that kid, pitying him for his incredible naivete. But as my memories unfold, I generally end up missing him, envying him for his fortitude, his guts, and most of all for his faith, his belief that with hard work and tenacity, anything was possible. So I was heading to California to become a writer. New York City would have made more sense for a writer, not to mention being over 2,000 miles closer than Los Angeles. But New York didn't have Hollywood. It didn't have endless sunshine, glamorous movie stars, or nearly as many tales of small-town nobodies arriving with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and shooting to fame and fortune overnight. The truth is that I knew next to nothing about New York or LA. If the internet had existed, I would have Googled the hell out of both cities, the film industry and the publishing world. Instead, being geographically, financially, socially, and educationally isolated, I drew my own conclusions. Since most of my favorite books were made into movies, I reasoned that the people who produced books were more or less the same people who made movies. It seemed to me that the majority of the stories that reached the world did so via Hollywood. After all, I didn't know many people who regularly read books, but everyone I knew watched movies, which made the movie-making capital of the world the obvious place to go. Even back then, the idea of being discovered in Hollywood was a cliche. It was the pipe dream of the desperate, but I didn't see it that way. I loved books and movies. I connected with those characters in a way I couldn't with anyone in my real life. I wanted to live fully, find out what makes people tick, what makes them different, what makes them the same. I wanted to write books and create movies with my own unique story. I didn't care about the 1 in a million odds the people back home scoffed about, because I knew I was not a natural-born storyteller, and it was my destiny to become a writer in Hollywood. Once I was discovered, after a year or two of struggling to pay dues, I would finally get to be who I wanted to be, instead of the shy, awkward kid I was pegged at before I'd reached junior high. That Seth Hardy was easy to miss. If he was noticed at all, he was quickly written off as weird, the type of guy who would never amount to much, certainly never be exceptional in any way. All of my attempts to prove this verdict wrong were met with indifference or ridicule. In Cherry Run, Pennsylvania, judgments were as final as they were swift. But making it in Hollywood, my God, no one could argue with that. At least not in 1988, before reality TV and viral videos could make any idiot famous. My big departure, however, had already gotten off to a lousy start, with my mom and 2 younger sisters crying as if I'd randomly decided to drive off to my death. Even my dad, who was usually quiet on such matters, urged that I at least wait until spring. But I'd been postponing my departure for 3 years. At that age, 3 years of delays is dangerously close to becoming a lifelong pattern. I didn't know that then, but I did know that the fire and self-confidence I had mustered to believe my dreams were worthwhile, worth a shot at least, had largely evaporated during those postponements. And if I didn't leave that morning, I never would. That didn't make leaving any easier. The first hurdle had been getting to Interstate 80 through 20 angst-ridden miles of snow-covered back roads, naked trees, empty fields, and the silent small towns that made up the only home I'd ever known. The lights of the Sligo General, where I worked to save the majority of the money to finance this expedition, glowed in the pre-dawn darkness, coaxing me to stop in and rethink this whole crazy idea. I'd never liked working there, and I hated going in on cold mornings, but it was all I could do to keep driving. The General would have been safe and forgiving, warm with the smell of brewing coffee and freshly baked donuts. I pressed on, across the frozen Clarion River and up Huckleberry Ridge, where icicles hung off the rock wall like the sharp, jagged teeth of a sneering monster. Just before reaching the interstate, a church sign issued a final warning. Eternity is a long time to be wrong. My answer to this was a mixtape I'd made for the trip. I ceremoniously shoved it into the cassette player as I whipped onto the westbound lane of I-80. Blasting the heavy metal tunes of Triumph, I sang along with the Canadian trio, belting out lyrics that celebrated following your heart, holding on to your dreams, and never surrendering. The songs worked their magic, charging me with a feeling of invincibility that carried me out of Pennsylvania, through Ohio, and into Indiana. With the wrong turn that took me into Kentucky, however, that momentum started to die down. The shortcut that got me lost took more wind from the sails. When the car finally broke down, I had to face the fear that the folks back home might be right about me after all. I lifted the hood. I checked the battery cables. I surveyed the engine for a leaky hose or a broken belt. Not seeing either, I realized how little I knew about cars. I leaned against the front fender and the silence settled around me, and the landscape came into view. A scrubby forest under a slate gray sky. A lonely road, all twists and turns, slush and mud. Its striking resemblance to a road back in Cherry Run seemed like a bad omen. All right, I said, okay, trying to reason with myself. There's no reason to panic here. This is a test, a good opportunity to see what I'm made of. Talking to myself was a habit I intended to leave back in Cherry Run. But considering I was the only company I had on the long road ahead, I decided to let it slide until my new life in California. I pulled on my tassel cap and gloves, grabbed the flashlight from under the seat, locked the car doors, and started walking, sloshing through the muck. My brand new Converse All-Stars were filthy and soaked through in minutes. This is nothing I can't handle, I said, now talking to an imaginary audience of naysayers back home. They were following me like the chorus in a Greek tragedy, solemn and disapproving, murmuring that part of my downfall was being unable to accept the reality of my situation. Look, I answered back, I'm not saying this doesn't suck. It does. My feet are going numb. My new All-Stars are shot. I barely have enough money to make it to California as it is, and fixing my car will probably wipe me out. So yeah, it sucks. But you know what? This is just grist for the mill, something to write about. You watch and see. This little detour is going to show up in one of my books someday. The whole dang sorry scene, right down to my freezing feet and ruined shoes. Knock me down 10,000 times and I'll get up 10,001. This is all part of the ride, and I couldn't care less if you or anyone else thinks I'm out of my tree because I know I'm not. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Yes,
that was
thank
lovely.
you guys. Thank
That
you very
was
much.
so fun. I have a lot to say, but I want to let Damian start. Go
All
ahead.
right,
What
yes.
are your thoughts?
I'm not sure there is any writer in America that do not empathize to a pretty significant degree
Yes.
with your character.
Well, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
And I was thinking, although there was a car in this story, I had said in your bio that you like riding a motorcycle, and I was
Yes.
thinking of Zen
Yes.
and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is one of my favorite books, and that how that is a journey, and how you're on this journey and you're talking to yourself, and I talk to myself all the time. And sometimes I answer.
Yes.
So this was really enjoyable. I love the prose. I love the movement of the prose. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
I love the fact that there's a moment in your short story, the first part of it, that reminds me of Michael Tolkien's The Player.
Oh, okay.
Where he's thinking he's about to sign a contract for a script. It doesn't actually play out, but he's thinking that's when I'll begin to live my real life.
Yes.
And that's I think that's
Oh,
writer.
yeah.
You know, you get that when I sign the book contract, when I
That's-
go on tour, when I see the review, when I that life will begin. That's the life I'm supposed to have. Darn it!
And
I'm
there's
not
always
supposed to be in Kentucky.
and there's always one more. And there's always one more though, because you get the book contract.
Yeah.
And then you sign the books and you do the book signings and you do all those things. And then you're like, who's going to option my, and then you're always something, a bigger
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of people tuning in and they have a lot of things that they'd like
That's
to say.
fantastic.
Jessica, who is a regular volunteer and does so many things here at Watershed, we all know Jessica. She says, well, you can read it. Natural born storyteller, absolutely true. And she says she loves your voice in this new piece, which is
Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you.
And Kirk, who turns in regularly as well, says great job to everyone. Uh-oh, we must have done this right. And Karen, one of our regular watchers and also someone who's been on the show, says, love hearing about a landscape that is so familiar to me. And I think that's the best part of any of the regional writing that we do or that we read or listen to. Greg Clary, of course, one of our friends, well done. Jessica also said she must have really been hanging in there, hooked me the whole way through. And you've got some applause here from Amanda. So there's a lot of people that have tuned in. Dave Athy says, thanks for being on the show. Oh, and Greg says, good old Cherry Run. So I think that's it, unless you'd like to say anything more about your work.
I'm just love the opportunity of being here. One thing I would like to say, I'm very excited. There is a movie possibility coming up
That's super exciting.
with my story Attachment. It's still in the works, but it's a novella that I wrote. It's different than my normal stuff. It's a sort of a paranormal type deal,
Ooh.
but they're really into it.
That stuff is selling these days.
It's going
right?
crazy.
Yeah.
So I had nightmares for a long time about this, and so I wasn't able to get rid of the nightmares until I actually wrote this story. And
Wow.
so actually, and it is on sale on Amazon right now for 99 cents. It's
wow.
it's the digital version. So, and it's a short book. It's only about 75 pages. So.
Now, I
Sweet.
want to ask a question.
Yes,
That's awesome.
absolutely.
I wanted to, so this is something that you've finished this story. Is
Yes.
this part of a new collection?
Yes, yes, it is.
And
this
you're
is-
working on it presently? Or
I'm working on it presently.
Okay, super
Yes.
cool.
Yes. This story's this is a big story. This is about 40 pages long. So I just read you the first 4.5.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, so
Cool, excellent.
so I can tell you Seth does get to Hollywood. What happens to him there? I'm still working on that.
Stay tuned for the rest of the story. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and for you being on the show, and for Jo, she's actually over here. I'm not pointing into nothingness. And of course, I think we carried it off, right?
We did. And what I'd like to tell everyone is thanks, David. Thanks, Joe. Thanks to the
Yes.
Watershed. And next week, we'll be back to our regular time of 8 p.m.
Yes.
So thanks for tuning in at 7 if you did. And you're more organized than I am.
Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a
Good
lot.
night.
Have a good night.